All right,
Do it.
so Pink Floyd. So we're going to be covering these guys a lot, particularly in the 70s, which is, I'm sure, why Josh is very excited to move on to the 70s because he can't get himself enough of Pink Floyd, who, I don't know if you guys have seen this on our Best Ever Albums website, but they have in there the list of the top 20 artists of all time.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Are they
And
on
Pink
there?
Floyd is number 3, the third best artist of all time, behind Radiohead at number 2, and who else at number 1?
The Beatles?
Would it be? The Beatles at number 1, of
Did
course.
you make this website?
I believe Matt did secretly.
This is why Best Ever Albums. Anytime anybody wants to argue with it, there might be some things we can challenge.
All right,
but
on to the
overall,
bio.
right.
On to the bio.
So, Pink Floyd was a psychedelic band that was formed in London in 1965. And at the time, it was the main members when they first started were Syd Barrett with the guitar and lead vocals, Roger Waters, who played the bass, Rick Wright, who was the keyboardist, and Nick Mason, who played drums. So essentially, Waters and Mason went to the same school together at the London Polytechnic Institute, where they studied architecture. And Wright was also there, and he joined a little bit later. So the three of them were pretty much together right off the bat. They had 3 other members join and they called themselves initially the Sigma Six. And they went through many name changes, which included, just some of these are really interesting, the Abdabs, the Screaming Abdabs, Leonard's Lodgers, the Spectrum Five, the Megadeths, and they finally settled on T-Set. And eventually they changed their name from T-Set to Pink Floyd when they were about to go on stage, or they were about to go to a show, and they realized that one of the other bands that was at this venue was also called T-Set. So they were like, oh man, we need to change our name. And the name change came from actually member Syd Barrett, who said, let's name them after 2 blues guitarists that were on a compilation record that he owned. So one of the blues guitarists was Pink Anderson, and the other one was Floyd Council. And he just said, let's call ourselves Pink Floyd. And I think initially they were called the Pink Floyd Sound, but then they eventually just changed it to Pink Floyd. So Barrett came into the band because he was childhood fans with Waters, and then when the person who was the lead singer initially was called to serve by the British Royal Air Force, Barrett came on to join the band as lead singer and guitarist. So the band, as some people might know, or one of the things that they became famous for were lengthy, jammy, psychedelic explorations in their music, and that kind of got started when they were playing as one of the resident band of a club called the Countdown Club in London, and they had to play 3 90-minute sets on a regular basis, which I thought was, just going along the lines of the incredible amounts of, show at the time, the hours that bands were playing, in the 60s. So as a way to prevent themselves from repeating a lot of the same songs, they just found themselves going into extended lengthy solos, which were able to, keep things a little bit more interesting for them. So they started also playing around with various lighting effects, enhancing the psychedelic experience. And it started off like a lot of these bands playing R&B standards, but then began incorporating much more of Syd Barrett's songs, as he was the principal songwriter in the early years. In 1967, they signed a record contract with EMI, and they released 2 singles on the Columbia label. So there's Columbia again. So their first album was called Piper at the Gates of Dawn, but we're going to be covering the second album, Saucerful of Secrets, which was released on June 27th, 1968. It is the number 71 album on our list, number 12 in 1968, and 621 of all time. So it was interesting. I thought that the album was actually recorded, the various parts of the album were recorded over the span of an entire year, from May of 67 to May of 68. And it did top the charts in the UK at number 9, but it never charted in the US until 2019, when it charted at number 158 when the mono version was released for Record Store Day. So there you go. They finally, it was the last Pink Floyd album to chart in the US, if I'm not
I think
mistaken.
that's because
people, the concentric circles of people that still buy albums and people that are Pink Floyd fans now basically overlaps, because how many people are buying albums anymore?
John, does the Zen diagram cover each other?
Yes, the Zen diagram of yes.
Why would you want a mono version of this album? That's like the best part of this album.
Anyway, let's let Matt. I think the commentary is going to be awesome on this, so let's let Matt get through his bio, and then
So, the main thing that I think the main theme with this album is that this was the departure of Syd Barrett, who throughout the recording and even prior to this, after
literally and physically, I'm guessing, correct?
Yeah, he started to kind of essentially lose his mind. He was doing most of the reports are saying that he was doing copious amounts of LSD, although some other people dispute that. But he essentially was going schizophrenic, and so this album, Saucerful of Secrets, saw more. Really, only Syd Barrett only has one song that he wrote that's on this record. The other songs were written mostly by Waters and Wright. And so this is that transitional album where Syd Barrett's on the way out, and coming into this album was David Gilmour, who went to school with Syd Barrett and also had played with him before Syd Barrett joined Pink Floyd. So he kind of knew the other members of the band. And when Syd Barrett would start to kind of, not show up, he would perform at shows by just kind of standing there and not really playing his instrument and just staring, into the crowd. Mason called him, was quoted as calling him completely distanced from everything that was going on. And they realized, hey, we need to get somebody else to fill this place. So David Gilmour comes in, and initially they still wanted to keep Barrett in the band to write songs, and to help with the production of things and tour with Gilmour. So very, very much in the same light as like the Brian Wilson project.
Yeah. Okay.
But this was quickly dismissed because it just got so bad with Barrett, with his erratic behavior, and he was just unreliable, and he just wasn't playing or doing, so the famous story was, on the way to a gig, someone in the van asked, hey, we're going to go pick up Syd. And they just said, nah, let's just not bother. So that was, in 1968, early 1968. But there was a period of time where where the band did perform with Gilmour and Syd Barrett in early January of 1968. So that's that's a lot of the Pink Floyd fans, this is a very interesting time for them, because this is really the bridge between the Syd Barrett, he was the front man. He was the main driving force of the band, with Piper at the Gates of Dawn and some of the other singles that weren't on albums, and then this enters Gilmour, and now we're starting to enter into the realm more of the Roger Waters writing more of the songs, and kind of taking the band in a different direction. So that's kind of the history of where we are with this album, and mainly this album is very much that. It's like we were talking about with, we mentioned this with the Beatles for Sale, with David Bowie's album Space Oddity. This is definitely a transitional album for the band, and it's here on our list. So this is going to be a fun conversation. John, we'll start with you.
Well,
talk to me.
Let me start with my biases right up front.
Where to begin?
I'm also often asked what's my least favorite popular band, and Pink Floyd is always my answer to that question. So I want to do it. So I was pleasantly surprised, and one of the things I'm trying to do is revisit long-held beliefs that I have and give honest listens. And I was pleasantly surprised that I felt neutral about this album. I did not hate this album. I felt neutral. I don't know this for a fact. I know what Piper at the Gates of Dawn sounds like. Jug Band Blues has to be what Syd Barrett wrote, isn't it? Like, it has to be. Yeah, because it has that British sound, like a British singer, British feel to it, which is what I think of in that first Pink Floyd album. That doesn't really ever present itself when they become mega Pink Floyd, king of the planetariums, like in the 1970s. But, I actually will say, Let There Be More Light, Remember a Day, and Corporal Clegg, I would listen to again. And I liked the song structure. I liked that they were a little more reined in than Pink Floyd became later. I often use the term masturbatory to describe Pink Floyd music. but they were not. They were interesting and tuneful, and I really like them. I can't say as much about songs 5, 6, and 7, but they were at least interesting enough that I was glad I listened to it. So, as Pink Floyd albums go, this one would be a success for me, and I'm gonna continue to try to be very open-minded to Pink Floyd, and I don't want to sell it short because I can appreciate the musicianship. But yeah, I would say for me, definitely neutral would be how I'd describe it, and certainly doesn't sound like Piper at the Gates of Dawn or really a lot like 70s Pink Floyd. Like there's elements of it certainly that you hear what 70s Pink Floyd would become as opposed to, their first album, but they're not really anywhere near like Wish You Were Here or stuff like that at this point. They're still very much like a jammy psychedelic, but almost 60s psychedelic type sound, more so than the psychedelic sound that they in some ways created to some degree. And of course this is I'm sure highly influential on many bands that I definitely can see how like a Radiohead, right, would really, the more offbeat Radiohead stuff and this stuff definitely overlaps with each other a little bit. So, yeah. So I'll pass to Josh though.
High praise from John.
For Pink Floyd,
neutral.
it's a very high praise for me. Yes.
Wow. Josh.
I thought this was a saucer full of garbage because I hope I like the later direction of Pink Floyd more. I mean, I do like.
I never thought Josh would be more. Anybody would be more negative on Pink Floyd than I would be. But wow, okay.
This album was really. I was really struggling with this album. I felt like they every song started like so promisingly, and then it just like went downhill, and it's like yanking my chain around. Like here's an awesome like guitar bass track to start the song, and then like go in some other completely different direction that doesn't even come back to that at all.
Boy, what do we want to clue Josh in on, Matt?
I want to let him finish. Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Finish.
I feel like that happened with multiple songs on this album. Let There Be More Light. Really, I was excited when I first heard. I was like, "Oh, it's going to be great," and then it wasn't. Remember a Day, Set Controls for the Heart of the Sun. I thought, and then that just became like a 7-minute repetitive song. You know how I feel about Kazoo, and Corporal Clegg has kazoos, so X that one out. Saucerful of Secrets, they have to have been influenced by 2001 like every other band at this period, because this sounds like a 2001 soundscape or a haunted house.
It also felt 2001 minutes long. I would describe that song as well.
Yeah. So if this is a transition album, maybe this is an outlier, and I'll like their first album. Maybe that will have something different to offer. And some of these, I mean, it sounds like we're going to be listening to a lot of Pink Floyd, so I better strap in. But yeah, I listened to this album twice, and it was hard both times. So I did not, I struggled I think I liked like the United States of America more than this album.
So Calliope trumps Kazoo?
Yeah, or at least like musical montages of different things does. Or something, I don't know. United States of America has a bit more electronic stuff in it too.
I still think that album's going to grow on you over time when we listen to more stuff, but we'll see.
Maybe. Os Mutantes, Emily really liked that album, by the way. I like that more than this album. So, I don't want to rag on it too much. But this is not my cup of tea. So.
Fair
tea
enough.
Set.
Yeah, I didn't know any songs on this album, even though I do like Pink Floyd a lot. I'm much more familiar with, the quote unquote, the big albums, right? Like The Wall and Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here and Animals, and even an album like Meddle. But this was new, so I was interested to hear this. I agree with you, Josh, that it opens right up with "Let There Be More Light." That bass line, the Waters is playing there, and then the organ, the keys that come in, and the drums. It's a great start to the album, right?
Yep.
And then it stops, and then it does something totally different, and you're like, and it's like a haunting, the far, far, far away, and it's like this weird rhythm thing going on, but. So I can see how that throws you off, right? This album, to me, I listen to this album a lot because this is not a record that you're going to be able to listen to twice and be able to.
I agree.
I couldn't digest this.
I listened to this 4 times for reference, just to give you an idea. Yeah, because I really want to give it an honest listen.
I probably listened to it closer. I was closer to 10.
Wow.
I listened to this a lot because, well, first of all, I do like Pink Floyd, and I think if you're a Pink Floyd novice, don't start off with this album. Just don't, right? Yeah. Josh, you're gonna the stuff we're gonna be doing, particularly in the 70s. I don't think you're gonna really like Piper at the Gates of Dawn much either. The 70s stuff is very different than this, right? Because Syd Barrett's writing.
Well, Jug Band Blues is representative to some degree.
Jug Band Blues is yes, it's more like that, but the stuff that you're listening to in the 70s is very different, and that's the stuff that makes them this huge arena rock, this huge, one of the best-selling artists of all time. Like Dark Side of the Moon was on the charts for over a decade or something like that.
Well, so I should add too that the main reference point for Pink Floyd for me is listening to the album backwards with Wizard of Oz. Like I always heard about that, so that's what I always associate Pink Floyd with.
Yes, and then there's that too.
And mine is always the fact that I went to a school with lots of people that loved to smoke the wacky weed, and we'd go to the planetarium every year, and they'd give us 5 choices, and they'd be awesome. Like there'd be like Laser Zeppelin, like Laser Nirvana, Laser Beatles, and they're all these great ones. And every year Laser Floyd won, and it was just like, oh my god. So yeah, so that's what I think of when I think of Pink Floyd sometimes. So maybe unfairly, I think of bad planetarium experiences.
Yeah, I get that, but
sober.
I think, yeah, that's your problem. So you're not going to start. This is not a starting point, right? But I think this is a really cool listen for me because knowing Piper at the Gates of Dawn, knowing the Syd Barrett, kind of story and where they went, I found more out of this, and the more I listened to it, the more I did like. Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun is a cool song in Pink Floyd lore because it is the only track that all 5 members, including Gilmour and Barrett, appeared on. So that for the recording of that, they were both doing that. They were both playing. I think that's kind of a cool song because it's also Roger Waters wrote that song, and he wasn't so much into the science fiction type stuff. But this is one of the rare songs that he would do that's in that genre, I guess. And it's a very subdued song, and I've read a lot of reviews about it that was saying that one of the things that people like a lot about this is the fact that you think you're like waiting for it to do something and go somewhere, and it doesn't. It just stays with that. Mm-hmm. Usually I kind of like it to do a little bit more, but I thought I still appreciated that song. I think Corporal Clegg I could certainly see how that's a challenging listen, Josh. But I think the more I listened to that, the more I liked it. It also represents one of the first war-themed Floyd song that Waters did, which became a big thing for him.
It's a really good song lyrically. I have to give the devil his due there. It's like I said, songs 1, 2, and 4. I liked actually a fair amount.
Yeah, and Waters wrote that about it was more of a tribute to his dad who died in 1944 in World War II, and it was kind of like obviously like a tongue-in-cheek thing, like, hey, here's this guy who lost his leg and it has a wooden leg and it's like a trophy, right? Like looking at that like you won a wooden leg, congratulations. The Saucerful, A Secret Song, the long track on here, it's like over 12 minutes. Yeah, that's a tough to me. I mean, that's the majority. It's done in 4 different parts, and the first 8.5 minutes it's basically just noise, right? It's just it's a variety of different. There's a little bit of a drum solo. There's
but not interesting noise. It's like I think they're going for jazz kind of, but it's not. Having listened to a lot of great jazz recently, like it very much stands out for not being John Coltrane or Pharoah Sanders or Eric Dolphy in terms of filling in space,
Right, and it's not. Yeah, so that's I do like the end of it, the fourth piece, which comes at about the last 3 or 4 minutes, and that's where. And so this kind of structure is very much something that Pink Floyd would do in subsequent albums. The one that stands out most is the song "Echoes," which is on Meddle, which we are going to get to. And there is a part of that song where in the middle, it's like a 22-minute long song, right? And in the middle, they do something similar to that, where it's just noises. It almost sounds like dolphins squealing, and it goes on for like 5 minutes, whatever. But
it feels like
to
50. I know that for a fact. For having listened to that album many times.
That to me is much more tolerable because at the beginning and the end, it's couched in song, right? In an actual song structure. This is kind of like the genesis of that, right? It's like, let's just, and the producer on here, who's Norman Smith, and Josh combing and John combing the stacks trivia. Who do we know? What do we know Norman Smith from?
Oh, jeez.
I don't know.
No.
I thought you would know that. He was the engineer that produced the Pretty Things album, and was also working with the Beatles at the same time. So so he was their original producer, and he argued against "Saucerful of Secrets," the song on this album, but he was shot down for that. That's actually broken up to 4 different pieces, which have to do with basically it's supposed to represent a battle sequence, like a war sequence, and the different.
For reference, producer and band label for The Doors shoots down their epic, overly long piece, but obviously Pink Floyd had a little bit more juice since they got to keep theirs on, right?
Apparently so.
Okay.
I didn't really read anything about anybody in the record company going, "Don't do that," which is not surprising because if there was something that they were saying don't do, I would have loved to have heard what that was when you have the rest of this album to juxtapose it against. But the track on here that I think it deserves the most talk about is Jug Band Blues, because that's really, not only is that Syd Barrett's last contribution on the album, it's the last song on the album, and it's his last contribution to the band, but it's the lyrical content of this is really a guy kind of recognizing that he's getting kicked out of the band, and he understands that it's kind of like he's understanding that he's losing his mind, but he also has some fairly lucid ways of talking about that. So that's one of the things that kind of stands out for a lot of people with this song, is that, it's really this weird juxtaposition of a dude that's losing it, but also very aware that he's losing it.
You know what's interesting, Matt? Can I just jump in real quick if you don't mind? Later, that idea of isolation is such a piece of Pink Floyd's songwriting, and I know some of that is because they're right, like "Wish You Were Here," right, is about Syd Barrett, right? And so that's, to me, when I think of Pink Floyd, so much of their stuff is about isolation and disassociation and stuff. So to get a song like Jug Band Blues this early that has those themes, you almost don't even notice it, because you know where they, at least for me, I know where they go later. Yep. But when you mention that now, hearing it, I hear it a lot better. So
that song sounds so different than the rest of the album too.
Yes. Well, that's Syd Barrett, right?
And that's that Britishness,
Yeah, and it's also different because when we get to Piper at the Gates of Dawn, those songs are a little bit, they're almost like childlike. They're a little bit happier. They're kind of goofy, right? This is a sad song. This is a guy that's saying goodbye to the band that he fronted and he was the head guy for a while, and and he's very aware that he's losing it, right? He's kind of, he can't really hack it anymore. So it's been called by the managers at the time, it's an extraordinary song, the ultimate self-diagnosis on a state of schizophrenia and the portrait of a nervous breakdown.
Didn't Syd Barrett though not feel he had schizophrenia? Wasn't that like a whole big thing for him?
So I didn't get that as much. I don't know. I can't say that specifically, but there was the acknowledgement, and maybe there's some truth to that, but there was the acknowledgement on his end that, I don't think he would have said, "I'm fine," right? If he's going to play a concert and he just can't play and he's just standing there and he's walking around not doing anything, I think he knew that something was wrong. He might not have been able to put his finger on it or be able to say, well, it's schizophrenia, or no, it's something else.
Right.
But he was also doing a ton of drugs, right? Supposedly. So he was certainly not a reliable, member in that respect, but but this is a somber song. This is and he wanted it to be a single. The band was like, hell no. And so he eventually leaves the band. I'll talk a little bit more about what happens with Syd Barrett when we talk about Piper at the Gates of Dawn, but it does end up being something where he does do a couple of solo albums, and he still got along with the band because Waters, Wright, and Gilmour all produced and worked with and played on his 2 solo albums that were done in 1970. So they still were trying to help him out, but they just couldn't carry on with him as a band member anymore. So, so I would say that I did like this the more I listened to it. I can certainly see everything that you're saying, Josh, and I'm not going to defend that this is like should this be on the list? I can't necessarily say that. I guess I see why it is because of what Floyd became and what it represented in that transition, because there really are kind of 2 completely different bands. But it's still fairly well regarded. I mean, with Floyd's like 15 albums that they have, I looked at a bunch of those lists that they have online where they say, what are the every Pink Floyd album ranked from worst to best,
Yeah.
And this one has topped out at 6. It was number 6 on Consequence of Sound. And then it went up to 9 for Ultimate Classic Rock. So somewhere between 6 to 9 is where people have, landed this album. And if you like Pink Floyd, if you don't know much about, kind of the earlier stuff, this is definitely a recommend for me. You got to listen to it a bunch of times though, because it does take a while to grow on you. But if I could totally see this not being your thing though.
Well, it sounds like it's more like deep cut. Not even like the hits of Pink Floyd, really.
No, I mean it's probably more well known for like some of those things that I was talking about, right? Like that set the controls for the Heart of the Sun is where all 5 of them are playing.
Mm-hmm.
Corporal Clegg is one of the things about that is that's Nick Mason is the main singer of that. He doesn't really sing on. That's like the only song that he ever really sings on. And Jug Band Blues, the last Syd Barrett song. So it's stuff like that. Let There Be More Light is the first song that David Gilmour played guitar solo on, so it's more of those things than anything else. But
I see.
So yeah, the one other thing I would say, the album cover. Did you find the album cover interesting at all, Josh? Was that probably the best part of the album for you? It was. Yeah,
Go ahead.
Maybe not.
No.
It was designed by an English design group. So the band contracted out to get the cover created. It was only the second time that EMI allowed a band to hire outside designers for the album cover. Can you guess the first?
Yeah, we all know the answer to that question. It
It is the Beatles, John. Yes,
Yeah. It does look almost like Native American, the album cover to some degree, which is weird for a British band, but that's the vibe I get a little bit.
Yeah.
With of course like a weird late 60s, early 70s, like I don't even know what the bottom of the album's supposed to be, but it looks like some kind of crystals or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I will say about this is in 2014, drummer Nick Mason named A Saucerful of Secrets his favorite Pink Floyd album, saying, quote, "I think there are ideas contained there that we have continued to use all the way up through our career. I think it was a quite good way of making Syd's departure and Dave's arrival. Of marking Syd's departure and Dave's arrival."
I actually don't disagree with that. It does show a lot of breadcrumbs of what they become, but they become very different. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then he closes with saying, "It's rather nice to have it in one record. When you get both things, it's a cross-fade rather than a cut." So I disagree. It's not my favorite Pink Floyd album by any stretch, but it's a very unique album in their catalog. And it's worth a listen if you have the stomach for it.
Gotcha.